Yet on Monday, Jamison fell victim in her own garage. It's not clear if anything was stolen, but her life was taken. Moments ago, the victim's aunt learned CPD arrested someone. Take a listen to her aunt's reaction.
We're honoring her legacy. We're honoring her life. But today we have a victory because this person has been caught. He is currently in custody. So yes, we can celebrate with a little bit of peace.
Now, tonight we know that Jamison leaves behind a 6-year-old autistic son and her entire family. They're dealing with this horrible loss. Jamison family, again, they will gather here for a balloon release and vigil here in West Garfield.
That was Sierra Jamison. Just weeks before her death, she sat in front of a camera and spoke openly about something many women live with every day. Fear. Fear of being targeted. Fear of being attacked. Fear of losing everything you worked so hard to build. Sierra wasn't speaking from theory. She had already survived a violent encounter once before, and she refused to let it define her. She talked about protecting what she had earned with years of sacrifice, her independence, her home, and most importantly, the life she was building for her son. At the time of that interview, Sierra Jamison was a 30-year-old single mother living on Chicago's South Side. She worked as a phlebotomist and was preparing to take the next step in her career by entering nursing school. But beyond the job titles and plans for the future, the role that mattered most to her was being a mother. Her 6-year-old son depended on her for everything. To the people around her, Sierra was resilient, focused, determined to create something better for her family despite the challenges life had already thrown her way. But the story of Sierra Jamison would not end with that interview. Only weeks later, on the evening of September 18, 2023, Sierra returned home to the house she shared with family in Chicago's Greater Grand Crossing neighborhood. She pulled her vehicle into the garage, expecting an ordinary end to an ordinary day. Instead, that garage would become the place where her life ended. Sierra Jamison was found strangled to death inside her own home. The man responsible was not a stranger hiding in the shadows. It was someone she had known for nearly 10 years, someone she trusted enough to allow into her life. His name was Lawrence Curtis Bowl. He was more than 3 decades older than Sierra, 63 years old at the time of the murder. And according to investigators, he had been waiting for her inside that garage. The danger she warned others about was already standing inside her life. If you're into real true crime stories, stories that dig deep into the facts and the people behind them, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We post new videos every single day, so there's always another case to uncover, another truth to explore. Sierra Jamison had spent most of her life on Chicago's South Side. It was where she was born, where she was raised, and where she had built the foundation of the life she was trying to create. By the time she turned 30 in September of 2023, she had already endured challenges that might have broken other people. But to those who knew her, Sierra had a reputation for pushing forward, no matter what. She lived in the Greater Grand Crossing neighborhood, in a rented home on South Indiana Avenue. The house was full of family, the kind of home where people moved through the same spaces, shared meals, shared worries, and shared the responsibility of looking out for one another. Sierra lived there with her mother, Alice, along with siblings and her aunt, Sadina. It wasn't a mansion, and it wasn't the final destination she dreamed about, but it was stable. It was home, and it was the place where Sierra was building the next chapter of her life. Professionally, she worked as a phlebotomist. Her days were spent drawing blood for medical tests, work that required precision, patience, and trust. Patients had to believe that the person standing in front of them knew what they were doing, and Sierra took that responsibility seriously. But the job wasn't the end of her ambitions. It was only a step along the path. Her goal was to go back to school and become a nurse. She talked openly about wanting more, not in a greedy or selfish way, but in the way someone talks when they are determined to build a better future. Nursing school was something she had been planning for, something she believed would open doors that had previously been closed. It meant better pay, more stability, more opportunities for the one person who depended on her more than anyone else. Her 6-year-old son. Sierra's son lived with autism and had already undergone open-heart surgery at a young age. His life required extra care, extra patience, and extra attention. Medical appointments, therapies, and monitoring his health were part of the routine. Through it all, Sierra was his primary caregiver, the person making sure everything stayed on track. Balancing that responsibility with work and everyday life was not easy. But Sierra did what millions of parents do every day. She made it work. Her schedule revolved around making sure her son had what he needed. That meant getting up early for work, handling appointments, coordinating care, and still trying to maintain some sense of normal life. To outsiders, it might have looked exhausting. To Sierra, It was simply motherhood. And despite the weight of those responsibilities, she was proud of what she had accomplished. Just days before everything would change, Sierra had celebrated her 30th birthday. Turning 30 is often a milestone that causes people to reflect on where they are in life, what they have achieved, and what they still want to accomplish. For Sierra, it was a moment of quiet pride. She had made it through difficult years, she had built stability for her child, and she had a clear vision of where she wanted to go next. Part of that pride was sitting right outside the house, a 2018 Jeep Wrangler. To some people, a vehicle is just transportation, a way to get from one place to another. But for Sierra, the Jeep represented something much deeper. She had purchased it herself, with money she earned. It was something she talked about with pride because she knew exactly how hard she had worked for it. Every paycheck, every sacrifice, every extra shift, they had all added up to that moment. The Jeep symbolized independence. It symbolized progress. It symbolized the fact that Sierra was building something real. She didn't come from wealth. She didn't have shortcuts. Everything she had achieved came from effort and persistence. And she wasn't shy about acknowledging that. She often talked about how many sacrifices she had made for her family, especially for her son. The Jeep wasn't just a vehicle. It was proof that those sacrifices had meant something. But life has a way of testing people when they least expect it. In December of 2022, roughly 9 months before her death, Sierra found herself in a situation that could have ended very differently. She was at a gas station on Chicago's South Side, filling up the Jeep. It was the kind of everyday errand people perform without thinking. But while she stood there pumping gas, a man approached her. He had a kitchen knife. The man demanded her keys. In that moment, Sierra was facing a choice that countless victims of violent crime have faced: comply and hope for the best, or resist and risk escalation. But something about the attacker caught her attention. He appeared nervous, uncertain. His body language didn't match the confidence someone might expect from a person committing an armed robbery. Sierra made a split-second decision. She refused. Nearby, 2 women noticed what was happening. Instead of turning away, instead of pretending they hadn't seen anything, they stepped in to help. One of them ran to her car and grabbed a bat from her trunk. They handed it to Sierra. What happened next was not what the attacker had expected. Sierra fought back. In broad daylight at that gas station, she used the bat to defend herself. The confrontation escalated quickly, and the attacker eventually fled without the Jeep.
Reached out to Sierra and asked would she share her story because she was the victim of an attempted carjacking.
Right.
And I got to tell you, I felt like she was so strong, willing to share her story. That takes a lot to say, I'm going to go on television and tell you what happened. And when I met this woman, what I really felt was that she was somebody who was so convicted, so, in her resolve to protect what she worked so hard for.
Right. Her young son, she mentioned.
Her young son, 6 years old. She's a beautiful, beautiful young woman.
And my Jeep, my Wrangler, that was something for a gift for myself because I know how hard I work for it. I know how many sacrifices I've done for my family, my son, because he's been through a lot. My son had open heart surgery. He has a disability, so he means a lot to me. And I'm not feeling let
Later,
this young...
police determined that the man had spent hours at that location searching for a victim. He had specifically been targeting young black women, assuming they would be easy targets, people who would hand over their belongings out of fear. Sierra proved that assumption wrong. The man was eventually arrested and convicted of attempted aggravated vehicular hijacking. He received a 4-year prison sentence. For Sierra, the experience was frightening, but it also reinforced something about her character. She wasn't someone who folded under pressure. She wasn't someone who gave up easily. She went home that day grateful to be alive and grateful to see her son again. But the experience changed her perspective. She realized that what had happened to her wasn't just an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of violence that many women, especially black women, experienced in the city. That realization is what led her to speak publicly about it. In August of 2023, just weeks before her death, Sierra agreed to sit down for an interview with journalist Dorothy Tucker. The conversation was part of a broader examination of violence against black women in Chicago. The statistics being discussed were difficult to ignore. In 2022, black women made up roughly 25% of crime victims in Chicago, despite representing about 16% of the city's population. Robberies and carjackings targeting women, particularly at gas stations, had become alarmingly common. Sierra was willing to share her story because she believed it mattered. She spoke about what it felt like to be targeted. She spoke about the fear that women often carry with them when going about ordinary routines. But she also spoke about resilience, about refusing to allow that fear to control her life. She talked about protecting what she had worked hard to build. She talked about her son, and she talked about the women who stepped in to help her that day at the gas station, describing the moment as an example of women supporting one another when it mattered most. The interview showed a woman who was confident, thoughtful, and determined. Someone who believed that speaking out might help others. But while Sierra was warning others about violence, a different threat was already forming in her own life. His name was Lawrence Curtis Bull. Bull was approximately 63 years old, more than 3 decades older than Sierra. The two had known each other for around 10 years. Over time, what had once been a long-standing friendship began to shift into something more personal. At some point, their relationship became romantic. Exactly when that happened remains somewhat unclear. Some accounts suggest it had been a recent development. Others suggest it had been ongoing for a longer period. What is clear is that Sierra trusted him. To her family, he was someone familiar, someone who had been around long enough that his presence didn't raise alarms. Sierra herself appeared comfortable around him. But what Sierra may not have fully known was the extent of Bull's past. Years before he entered her life, he had already accumulated a history of violent behavior. In 1993, in North Carolina, Bull was convicted of child abuse. The offense was serious enough that he served approximately 6 years in prison before being released around 1999. That same year, he was also convicted of breaking and entering and was sentenced to 2 years to be served concurrently with the 6 years. A few years later, in 1997, he was convicted of misdemeanor assault on a woman. After relocating to Chicago, the pattern continued. In 2011, he was arrested and charged with domestic violence and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. The charges were ultimately dropped, and the case did not move forward. Despite this history, Bull managed to maintain a relatively ordinary public life. He worked as a machine operator at a manufacturing company that produced foam cups and containers, holding the job for about 7 years. To coworkers and acquaintances, he may have appeared like any other employee, someone showing up to work, completing his shift, and going home. But behind that routine was a record that told a very different story. And as his relationship with Sierra continued, there were signs that things were beginning to change. According to statements that would later surface during the investigation, there had been at least one volatile incident between them in the weeks leading up to her death. Bull would later claim that Sierra had once pointed a weapon at him during an argument. The claim was disputed and never verified. What it did suggest, however, was that their relationship had become unstable. Arguments had escalated. Tension had grown. Whatever dynamic had once made Sierra feel comfortable around him was shifting into something more unpredictable. And as those tensions built quietly behind the scenes, the situation between them was moving toward a breaking point, one that would soon unfold inside the garage of the home on South Indiana Avenue, where Sierra had believed she was simply returning at the end of another ordinary day. On the evening of September 18, 2023, Sierra Jamison returned home to the house she shared with family on the 7800 block of South Indiana Avenue in Chicago's Greater Grand Crossing neighborhood. It was around 6:35 p.m., the kind of ordinary evening that blends into thousands of others in a person's life. Nothing about the moment suggested that the next few minutes would become the final chapter of her story. Sierra pulled into the driveway in her Jeep Wrangler. After spending the day navigating the responsibilities that had come to define her life, work, parenting, and the countless small tasks that come with holding a household together, she was simply coming home. Her plan was routine. She would pull into the garage, gather her things, and head inside, but the garage was not empty. Lawrence Curtis Bull was already inside. Exactly how long he had been waiting remains unclear, but investigators would later determine that he had positioned himself there before Sierra arrived. Hidden from view, he waited for the moment she pulled into the garage, unaware of the danger only feet away from her. Sierra drove inside, likely believing she was ending just another day. But as soon as she stepped out or began to gather her belongings, the situation changed. Bull attacked her. The violence that followed was not a brief confrontation or a sudden burst of anger that ended in seconds. Strangulation is one of the most physically demanding and prolonged forms of homicide. It requires sustained force and a deliberate decision to continue applying pressure even as the victim fights to survive. Investigators would later describe the injuries Sierra suffered during the attack. Medical evidence showed abrasions around her neck, marks consistent with fingernails. There were hemorrhages near her spine. Bruising was found on her tongue. These injuries told a story that no witness had to describe. Sierra fought back. She struggled against the hands around her neck. She tried to breathe. She tried to survive. But Bull did not stop. Eventually, Sierra stopped breathing. The struggle ended. The garage fell silent. But what happened next would reveal that the violence had not been an uncontrollable outburst that ended the moment Sierra lost consciousness. Instead of fleeing the scene in panic, Boley took steps that suggested calculation. He took Sierra's cell phone. Then he covered her body with a green tarp. The tarp concealed what had happened inside the garage, hiding Sierra from anyone who might glance inside from the alley or driveway. It created the appearance that nothing unusual had occurred. Inside the house, Sierra's family began to notice something strange. Sierra was normally responsive. When people texted or called her, she answered. But now, her phone was silent. Messages went unanswered. Minutes passed, then more. Concern began to grow. Family members attempted to reach her again, expecting that perhaps she was busy or had stepped away from her phone. But the silence continued. Eventually, Sierra's brother went outside to check the alley behind the house. When he looked toward the garage, he saw Lawrence Bowl leaving the area. Bowl was pulling down the garage door as he walked away, creating the impression that everything inside had already been taken care of. The brother approached him and asked about Sierra's phone. Bowl offered an explanation. He said Sierra had thrown the phone at him during an argument and had then stormed off to go to the store. It was a quick story, simple enough to discourage further questions. But inside the house, something still didn't feel right. Sierra's sister looked through a window and saw something that made the situation immediately more alarming. The Jeep was still parked inside the garage. If Sierra had gone to the store, the Jeep wouldn't be there. The realization began to spread through the house. Panic started to replace confusion. Family members started trying to figure out what was happening. If Sierra's car was still in the garage, then she should have been inside the house or nearby. But she wasn't. At around 7:30 p.m., Sierra's mother, Alice Jamison, decided to check the garage herself. She walked outside, likely hoping to find some simple explanation for the growing concern. Maybe Sierra had stepped away for a moment or had been on the phone. Instead, she walked into a nightmare. Inside the garage, Alice saw something on the ground, covered by a tarp. When she pulled it back, she found her daughter. Sierra was lying on the floor. Alice immediately tried to save her. She attempted CPR, trying to force breath back into her daughter's body, hoping that somehow she had arrived in time. But it was already too late. Emergency responders were called, and police arrived at the scene. Paramedics examined Sierra and confirmed what her mother had already begun to fear. Sierra Jamison was dead. The Cook County medical examiner would later rule her death a homicide caused by strangulation. For Sierra's family, the loss was immediate and devastating. Just hours earlier, she had been alive, coming home at the end of a normal day. Now she was gone, and the man responsible had already disappeared into the city. In the hours after the murder, Boley made a decision that would later become crucial evidence in the case against him. He called his ex-wife. During that call, he admitted what he had done. He told her that he had strangled Sierra. The call revealed something about the state of mind of the person responsible. Whether he was seeking sympathy, confession, or simply a way to process what had happened, the result was the same. He had acknowledged the killing.
Sierra Jamison was ambitious. The 30-year-old worked as a phlebotomist and was about to start nursing school.
Sierra was a hard-working, independent young woman. She had goals and dreams.
Carmela Williams says her niece also made family her top priority. Jamison and her 6-year-old son were living in a house she rented in the Greater Grand Crossing neighborhood. She moved her mother and 2 younger sisters in to live with them.
Her daily routine was coming home, getting off work, coming to greet and meet everybody in the house, you know what I'm saying, loving on her son.
Jamison's family was in the home Monday evening, but she never made it in the house. After a search, Jamison's mother found her daughter's body in the garage. The medical examiner saying the cause of death was strangulation. Jamison's aunt says Sierra was renting the home in the 7800 block of South Indiana from a former co-worker and was looking to move. They also say they believe they know the man who killed her.
So I guess he just couldn't take the rejection, you know, so I guess he just took it out in a way he shouldn't have took it out as a man.
Meanwhile, the investigation into Sierra's death began to move forward. Police gathered information from the family, from the scene, and from anyone who might have seen or heard something. The evidence quickly began pointing toward Lawrence Curtis Bowl. All over social media, her family posted his pictures and kept requesting for anybody with information about his whereabouts to contact them or the police. Eventually, 2 days after the murder, on September 20th, 2023, Bowl turned himself in to police. He surrendered in the Pullman neighborhood of Chicago and was taken into custody. Investigators placed him under arrest and charged him with first-degree murder in the death of Sierra Jamison. During questioning, Bowl attempted to explain the killing. He claimed that when the confrontation began, he believed Sierra had a gun. According to his account, he thought his life was in danger. especially as he claimed they had a fight just weeks earlier and she pulled a gun at him. But his own statements undermined that claim. Bull admitted that at some point during the struggle, he realized Sierra did not actually have a weapon. Despite that realization, he continued strangling her. He described hearing her take what he believed was her final breath. He described seeing her leg jerk involuntarily as she died. Those details would later become part of the evidence prosecutors presented to demonstrate that the killing could not be justified as self-defense. 2 days later, on September 22, 2023, Bull appeared in court for a detention hearing before Judge Susana Ortiz. Prosecutors laid out the facts of the case, describing the attack, the physical evidence, and Bull's criminal history. They also detailed the statements he had made to police after surrendering. Bull's defense attempted to argue that the incident had been an act of self-defense, referencing the alleged prior confrontation between the two. But the court found no evidence that Sierra had been armed at the time of the attack. Judge Ortiz ruled that Bull would be held without bail. The severity of the crime and his documented history of violence weighed heavily in that decision. Bull would remain in custody as the case moved forward through the legal system. During that period, Sierra's family continued trying to cope with the loss. Community members gathered for vigils and memorials, remembering the woman whose life had been cut short.
And my Jeep, my Wrangler, that was something for a gift for myself because I know how hard I work for it. I know how many sacrifices I've done for my family, my son, because he's been through a lot. My son had open heart surgery. He has a disability, so he means a lot to me. And I'm not finna let this young man with a knife at that take anything I work hard away from me.
I reached out to Sierra and asked would she share her story because she was the victim of an attempted carjacking.
Right.
And I got to tell you, I felt like she was so strong, willing to share her story. That takes a lot to say, I'm going to go on television and tell you what happened. And when I met this woman, what I really felt was that she was somebody who was so convicted, so, in her resolve to.
One of those gatherings took place in West Garfield Park, where family and friends released balloons and spoke about Sierra's life and the impact she had on those around her. Her family opened a GoFundMe for burial expenses and especially to take care of her son. Due to his condition, the road ahead will likely be very long and hard. But even as the community mourned, the legal system slowly worked its way toward trial. The process took time. Months passed, then years. Finally, on December 13, 2025, more than 2 years after the murder, a Cook County jury reached its decision. Lawrence Curtis Bull, now 65 years old, was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder in the death of Sierra Jamison.
A man has been found guilty in the murder of a woman found dead in her garage. On Thursday, a jury found 65-year-old Lawrence Boyle guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder in the death of 30-year-old Sierra Jamison. Jamison was found strangled to death in September 2023 in Grand Crossing. Prosecutors said Jamison and Boyle were in a romantic relationship.
For the family, the verdict represented a measure of justice. It could not bring Sierra back, but it confirmed what they had known since the moment her body was discovered in that garage. The man responsible had been held accountable, but the consequences of the crime extended far beyond the courtroom. Sierra Jamison's 6-year-old son was left without his mother. The woman who had fought for him, cared for him, and planned her entire future around his well-being was suddenly gone. In the aftermath of the tragedy, family members stepped forward to ensure that he would continue to receive the care and support he needed. For many people who learned about Sierra's story, one detail remained impossible to ignore. Just weeks before she was killed, Sierra had spoken publicly about violence against Black women in Chicago. She had shared her own experience of surviving an attempted carjacking. She had spoken about fear, resilience, and the determination